The year is 1972. Sri Lanka, then known as Ceylon, is an island nation of breathtaking beauty, a jewel in the Indian Ocean. Grainy images from the era show a bustling Colombo, lush green tea estates blanketing the central highlands, and factories humming with the promise of a prosperous future. But beneath this veneer of tranquility, the seeds of economic collapse were already being sown. The country was in the grip of a socialist experiment, one that would fundamentally reshape its destiny and set it on a path toward ruin. This is the story of how a nation, once a model of post-colonial success, began its descent. It's a story of ideology, political unrest, and decisions that would cripple an economy for decades to come. To understand the crisis that would later engulf Sri Lanka, we must return to this pivotal moment in its history. The government of Prime Minister Sirimavo Bandaranaike, fueled by strong socialist and Marxist beliefs, had embarked on a radical path of nationalization and state control. The idea was simple: to create a self-sufficient, equitable society. The reality, however, would be far more complicated and destructive. In the political landscape of the early 70s, radical leftist movements were gaining significant traction. Among the most prominent was the Janatha Vimukti Peramuna, or JVP, a Marxist-Leninist party that had staged a violent insurrection just a year earlier in 1971. Although suppressed, their ideology continued to permeate society, especially among the youth and the working class. Their calls for the overthrow of the existing order resonated with many who felt left behind. This radical sentiment was mirrored in the powerful trade union movements that dominated the country's key economic sectors. From the bustling port of Colombo to the sprawling tea plantations, trade unions held immense power. Inspired by communist ideals, they demanded greater workers' rights, higher wages, and more state control. While these demands were often justified, the method was one of constant disruption. Strikes became a daily reality. Footage from the time shows masses of workers marching, banners held high, chanting slogans against the government and private enterprise. The docks fell silent. Tea pluckers laid down their baskets. Factory floors were deserted. Each strike was a blow to the nation's productivity, a self-inflicted wound on an already fragile economy. The government's response was not to liberalize, but to double down on its socialist agenda. The Land Reform Act of 1972 was a landmark policy. Under this law, vast swathes of privately owned land, particularly the highly profitable tea, rubber, and coconut estates, were nationalized. The state took control, promising to manage these resources for the benefit of all. The result was catastrophic. Experienced managers were replaced by political appointees, who often lacked the expertise to run these complex operations. Efficiency plummeted. The quality of Sri Lanka's world-famous Ceylon tea began to decline, and with it, a vital source of foreign exchange. Simultaneously, the government pursued a policy of import substitution. The goal was to build a self-reliant economy by producing everything domestically, from cars to textiles. The state established numerous corporations to run these industries. But without competition or market discipline, these state-owned enterprises became bloated, inefficient, and corrupt. They were a constant drain on the national treasury, producing low-quality goods that nobody wanted. Instead of fostering innovation, the policy stifled it. The private sector, seen as an enemy of the socialist state, was squeezed out through heavy regulation and taxation. The economic data from this period tells a stark story. Charts from 1971 to 1972 show a sharp decline in GDP growth. As production stalled and state spending soared, inflation began to climb, eating away at the savings of ordinary people. Most critically, the country's foreign exchange reserves dwindled. With exports of tea and rubber falling, and no significant new industries to replace them, Sri Lanka was running out of the hard currency needed to pay for essential imports like fuel, medicine, and food. The consequences were soon felt on the streets. Long queues began to form outside state-run cooperative stores. People waited for hours, often in vain, for basic necessities like bread, rice, and sugar. Shelves grew empty. A thriving black market emerged where essential goods were sold at exorbitant prices. The promise of an equitable society had turned into a reality of shared scarcity and hardship. The frustration and despair were palpable. The very people the socialist policies were meant to uplift, the workers, the farmers, the urban poor, were now bearing the brunt of the economic mismanagement. The political atmosphere grew increasingly tense. In Parliament, debates were fiery and acrimonious. The opposition warned of impending disaster, but the government, locked in its ideological certitude, pressed on. The vibrant democracy was becoming increasingly authoritarian, as the state sought to control every aspect of life and the economy. The dream of a socialist utopia was crumbling, leaving behind a legacy of debt, inefficiency, and public disillusionment. The economic foundations of the nation were being systematically weakened, creating vulnerabilities that would be cruelly exploited in the years to come. This period, from 1972 onwards, was not just a temporary downturn. It was the beginning of a long-term structural decay. The nationalization of plantations, the rise of militant trade unionism, and the failure of state-controlled industries created a perfect storm. It eroded the country's productive capacity and fostered a culture of dependency on the state. The economic pain and social unrest of this era created a fertile ground for extremism to flourish once again, setting the stage for an even more violent and destructive chapter in the nation's history. The troubles of the 70s were a warning, a harbinger of the darkness that lay ahead. This was only the beginning. 17 years later, Sri Lanka would face its darkest chapter of internal destruction, the JVP Insurrection of 1988-89. The economic collapse of the 70s had laid the groundwork for a period of unimaginable violence and turmoil that would tear the island apart. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary insightful, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next episode, where we will explore the terrifying escalation of violence in the late 1980s. See you next time.